Victor's voice echoed through the sleek glass conference room, full of rehearsed excitement. Brad represents the next generation of leadership, he said, gesturing toward his smug-looking nephew seated at the head of the table. Fresh perspective, disruptive thinking. He's exactly what Meridian needs. I sat 2 seats down, silent, fingers laced on the polished table, eyes steady on the board. I wasn't surprised. I'd heard the rumblings, seen the calendar invites shift, watched as Brad began holding meetings without me, meetings about my division. Victor continued. And of course, we're grateful to Katherine for helping onboard him so seamlessly. We'll be restructuring slightly to allow her more flexibility in an advisory role. That's when Margaret Lynn, one of the independent board members, glanced in my direction and spoke. Actually, before we continue, Ms. Mitchell has requested a few minutes to address the board. Victor's face twitched. Brad leaned back. I stood. From my leather portfolio, I pulled a clean stack of reports, each clipped and labeled. I handed one to every board member, moving slowly, deliberately, like I had all the time in the world. Thank you, I said calmly. I've spent 12 years at this company, building a system that works, quietly, cleanly, and legally. But in the last 6, I've also been documenting every request I've received to compromise that system. I turned to Victor. Starting with your directive to suppress adverse event data from the Nepotism trial. A hush fell. I continued, voice firm but low. The contents of these reports have already been submitted to the FDA and SEC. As of this morning, I filed formal whistleblower complaints. What happens next is up to the board. Then I sat. And let the truth do what it always does when it's finally unchained. Break everything wide open. 12 years ago, I started at Meridian Pharmaceuticals as a junior analyst fresh off a messy divorce and a newly minted degree I'd worked on part-time while raising my son. I was 35 and tired, but determined. I didn't have time to be flashy or political, I just wanted to do the work well and go home knowing I'd earned my place. And I did. I worked late without being asked. I volunteered for audits no one else wanted. I read compliance manuals on the weekends, flagged process inefficiencies that had gone unnoticed for years. Within 5 years, I was running the entire manufacturing division. By year 8, I'd helped bring Meridian's production facilities into the top 10% for efficiency across the industry. No fines. No compliance flags. Not a single regulatory slap on the wrist during my tenure. People respected me. They came to me for answers, not because I was loud, but because I was right. And I kept things moving. But I wasn't flashy. I wasn't family. Victor Harrington had been CEO for 3 years when his nephew, Brad, came on board. Fresh out of a mid-tier MBA program, full of podcast buzzwords and LinkedIn quotes, Brad was the kind of guy who talked more than he listened and thought mentorship meant shadowing me for 2 hours a week and then taking my ideas to the VPs as if they were his own. Still, I did what I'd always done, I played the role. I taught him what mattered. I walked him through our systems. I explained why we didn't cut corners, why timelines mattered more than shortcuts, why there's a reason compliance officers look tense all the time. He smiled. Nodded. Took notes. Then, when I wasn't in the room, he did the opposite. I started hearing whispers, Brad's plans to streamline reporting structures, to consolidate redundancy in leadership. Translation, get experienced managers and replace them with yes men. I brushed it off until the Monday morning when Victor called me into his office. He didn't waste time. There's going to be a bit of restructuring, he said, not even offering me a seat. Brad will be taking over as Director of Operations. We want to give him a chance to lead. You'll transition into an advisory role, Assistant Director. Help him ease in. I felt the words settle like wet cement. 12 years. And now I was supposed to report to a kid whose only qualification was his last name. But I didn't react. I smiled. Just enough to keep the room neutral. Of course, I said. May I have 2 weeks to transition my projects? Victor looked pleased with himself. That's very professional of you, Katherine. I appreciate your grace. He didn't realize that grace was the last thing I was preparing to show him. Because the moment I walked out of that office, I knew I wasn't stepping down. I was stepping in. I closed the door to Victor's office and walked calmly through the executive hallway, nodding at the assistants, smiling faintly at a colleague who gave me a puzzled look, probably wondering why I looked so composed after what must have felt like a public slap. But what no one knew, not Victor, not Brad, not the HR rep sitting silently in the corner, was that I'd been ready for this day for years. I didn't plan to be betrayed, but I'd prepared for the possibility. Because when you work in a space where integrity is inconvenient, and the people in charge value bloodlines over backbone, you learn to document everything. That night, I went home, poured a glass of wine I didn't finish, and pulled out the encrypted drive I kept in the back of my filing cabinet. I opened the folder titled Just in Case. Inside, a 6-year archive of emails from Victor instructing me to massage compliance data to make our reports look better to investors. Meeting notes where he suggested pushing Phase 2 trial results just a little further to speed approval. Screenshots of spreadsheets with altered timestamps. Photos of internal memos, shredded originals, but I'd kept digital copies. And then there were the voice recordings. In our state, one-party consent laws meant I could legally record any meeting I was part of. And I had. Especially the ones where Victor told me to handle the issue internally whenever there was a quality control breach or a manufacturing delay that threatened a shipment timeline. One recording from 2 years ago had Victor saying, "We're not here to slow down innovation with paperwork, Katherine. If QA needs to miss a few boxes on the checklist, that's not the end of the world." Yes, it was. Especially in pharmaceuticals. I spent the next 4 days after work compiling everything. I didn't just want to expose Victor, I wanted to make it undeniable. I cataloged violations, cross-referenced them with FDA regulations, outlined timelines, attached attachments. I created an executive summary, a neutral, professional tone that laid out everything. The what. The who. The when. And most importantly, the risk. Then I contacted 2 board members directly. Margaret Lynn, a former FDA compliance officer turned audit chair. Tom Reyes, a retired CEO with a reputation for zero tolerance on ethics. I asked for 10 minutes of their time, confidentially. I told them what I had. Not everything, just enough to make them listen. They did. And they didn't hesitate. "We're adding you to the board meeting agenda," Margaret said. Discreetly. "Let Victor speak first." Perfect. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew what I was walking into. Victor would be spinning Brad's promotion as a masterstroke, selling the board on family legacy and visionary youth. But I wasn't coming in to argue. I was coming in to present the truth. And the truth didn't need polish. It just needed a voice. The morning of the board meeting, I dressed with the same precision I used when overseeing a regulatory audit, calm, neutral, deliberate. No bold colors, no jewelry that clinked. Just quiet authority. The conference room on the 16th floor of Meridian's headquarters was filled with the usual crowd, board members, a few senior VPs, Victor standing confidently at the front with his nephew Brad beside him, oozing youthful smugness in a too expensive suit. His hair was too perfect. His posture too casual. I took a seat near the end of the table, my portfolio resting on my lap. Victor launched into his speech with full CEO flair, charts, graphs, a PowerPoint filled with vague jargon and photos of Brad touring the operations floor. He used words like disruption, vision, and alignment with future-facing values. Brad nodded earnestly at all the right moments, clearly rehearsed. I didn't look at Victor. I watched the board. Margaret Lynn's face was unreadable, but her pen didn't stop moving. Tom Reyes sat back in his chair, hands folded, waiting. Victor wrapped up with a thin smile. And now, we open the floor to questions. That's when Margaret cleared her throat. I believe Ms. Mitchell has requested time to address the board before we move to vote on any changes in leadership. Victor blinked. That won't be necessary. Katherine and I have already discussed the. Victor, Tom interrupted, let's hear her out. I stood. No slideshow. No theatrics. Just the weight of 12 years behind my voice. I handed out the reports. One copy to each board member. Sectioned, color-coded, labeled. Over the last 6 years, I'd been directed on numerous occasions to ignore standard operating procedures, alter internal documentation, and underreport compliance flags related to production errors and adverse events during trial phases. Many of those directives came from Mr. Harrington directly. There were no gasps, just silence. The kind that fills a room when people know they're about to witness a tide shift. In these reports, I continued, you'll find corroborating emails, signed forms, calendar invites, and internal memos. You'll also find records of my private communications with the FDA and SEC, which I submitted under protected whistleblower status last week. The timestamped copies are included for your reference. Victor stood. This is outrageous. She's misrepresenting internal discussions and blowing minor issues. I've also included voice recordings, I said, without looking at him. On file, per Indiana's one-party consent law, detailing explicit instructions to suppress manufacturing quality reports in Q2 of last year. Including a directive to approve a shipment batch that failed final visual inspection standards. Margaret spoke quietly. We'll need an executive session. Immediately. Tom nodded. Agreed. Everyone not on the board, please step out. I gathered my things and walked to the door. As I passed Victor, I looked him in the eye for the first time that day. He wasn't smiling anymore. And Brad? Brad looked like he was about to be sick. I didn't say a word. Because I didn't need to. I had already said everything I needed, clearly, calmly, and on the record. They kept me waiting in the hallway for almost 40 minutes. I sat on the bench outside the boardroom, legs crossed, hands folded neatly over the same portfolio I'd carried for years. The one I used in every major presentation, quarterly report, and crisis planning session. The same one Brad had once referred to as your little binder thing. Inside that room, they were unspooling a mess 6 years in the making, emails, voice memos, doctored reports, and compliance shortcuts that had been hidden under Victor's polished language and family-first PR. I didn't pace. I didn't fidget. I just waited. Finally, the door opened, and Margaret stepped out. Her expression gave nothing away, but her words did. They'd like you to return. I walked back in and sat in the same chair. The mood had shifted. No more performative smiles. No small talk. Victor was gone. Brad sat alone, shoulders sagging, looking like someone had finally told him he wasn't bulletproof. Tom Reyes spoke first. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for your clarity and your restraint. He paused. Folded his hands. We've placed Mr. Harrington on immediate administrative leave pending full investigation. Brad's promotion is suspended until further review. I gave a polite nod. Not smug. Just steady. Then Margaret leaned forward. We'd like you to resume your role as Director of Operations immediately, Interim VP, if you're willing. Full access. Full authority. No interim decision will move forward without your oversight. I took a slow breath. If I accept, I'd like to add a few conditions. Margaret smiled faintly. We assumed you might. I opened my notebook and read directly. 1. The creation of an internal ethics and compliance committee, co-chaired by myself and an external compliance advisor. 2. Complete overhaul of the internal reporting system, anonymous, secure, and fully independent of executive review. 3. A full audit of the last 4 years of manufacturing data to be conducted by a third party. The room was quiet. No one objected. Tom said, done. That night, I returned to my office, Not the temporary one HR had reassigned me to, but my office. The desk I'd earned. The space I had kept running like clockwork. There was a note slid under the door. Handwritten. No signature. It said, "Thank you for doing what the rest of us were too afraid to." I tucked it into my drawer. The next morning, my inbox lit up with messages from employees across departments. Congratulations, yes, but more than that, relief. Gratitude. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making it safe to tell the truth, out loud. The internal investigation took nearly 3 months. External auditors combed through every inch of the company's compliance records, manufacturing logs, and internal communications. What I had provided was just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface, they found more, dozens of small violations Victor had buried under layers of delegation, carefully worded memos, and silent complicity. Brad resigned 2 weeks into the audit, citing health reasons. No press release. No goodbyes. He packed up his glass office one evening after hours, and security walked him out. I didn't watch. I didn't need to. When the final report was presented to the board, it confirmed what we already knew. Victor Harrington had knowingly suppressed quality failures, pressured staff into falsifying metrics, and manipulated internal review protocols to push unstable product batches to market faster. The consequences could have been catastrophic. Victor was officially terminated from the company. The board sent a letter to the FDA and SEC confirming their full cooperation and commitment to reform. A corporate spokesperson quietly released a press statement about leadership transitions and renewed ethical alignment. I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't have more to say, but because I knew silence, too, could carry power when rooted in truth. They offered me the CEO role. The chairwoman herself called me into her office, congratulated me, and said, "You've shown more strength and integrity in 3 months than we've seen in this building in 10 years. But I declined. "I'm not a face," I said. "I'm a spine. I'd rather be in the systems than the speeches." Instead, I accepted the full-time role of Vice President of Operations, with full authority to rebuild our compliance infrastructure from the ground up. I chose the external auditor I trusted, restructured reporting protocols, and implemented an internal ethics hotline that rang straight to my desk, no more whispers dying in empty corners. The most important thing I created was the ethics committee, co-chaired by myself and a legal advisor from outside the company. We met weekly. We reviewed complaints without bias. And when employees walked into my office now, they did so without fear. One afternoon, a junior compliance analyst, barely 2 years out of college, came by after a meeting. She lingered at the door. "Ms. Mitchell," she said softly, "I just wanted to say, thank you. Before you spoke up, I thought we had to keep our heads down and stay quiet. I almost quit. But after you did what you did, I filed my first report. I knew I wouldn't be alone." I smiled. "You're not," I told her. "And you never will be again." That night, I stayed late in the office. Not from pressure, not from fear, but from purpose. I walked the manufacturing floor, spoke with supervisors, checked the line metrics. The air was different. Lighter. Not because the work was easier, but because we were finally telling the truth while doing it. 6 months after the board meeting, I stood in front of a packed auditorium at Purdue's College of Pharmacy, delivering a guest lecture titled Integrity in the Supply Chain, Lessons from the Inside. Behind me, a projector screen showed no charts, no scandal headlines, just a single sentence in clean black text. Integrity doesn't make headlines, but it prevents disasters. I didn't tell the story for drama. I told it because every industry, especially pharmaceuticals, needs people who won't flinch when asked to bend. Needs people who document, who speak, who protect the patients at the end of the pipeline more than they protect their job titles. After the talk, a student approached me, bright-eyed, notebook in hand. She looked like I had 12 years ago. "How did you know when it was time to stop being quiet?" she asked. I smiled. The moment they assumed I'd stay quiet forever. Back at Meridian, the culture had changed. Slowly. But tangibly. Supervisors spoke up when timelines felt unsafe. The quality assurance team had gained new hires and full independence from executive interference. The ethics hotline had logged dozens of calls, not all catastrophic, but all taken seriously. People weren't afraid anymore. And neither was I. One evening, as I walked the operations floor, one of the maintenance staff, Cal, who'd been there as long as I had, waved me down. "Hey, VP," he grinned. "It's weird calling you that. You still check the coolant seals yourself." I laughed. "Force of habit." He paused. "Feels better around here. Like we're finally working in a company that sees us." I nodded. That's the point. A system can't protect people if the people inside it are too scared to speak. That weekend, I cleared out a shelf in my home office. On it, I placed the original binder, every report, email, and memo I'd once feared holding onto. It no longer felt like a burden. It felt like armor I'd finally outgrown. I never framed a promotion letter. I didn't print the headlines from industry blogs calling me the woman who saved Meridian from itself. But I kept one photo on my desk. It was from the day we announced the ethics committee. Just a group of us, standing outside the boardroom. Smiling. Not triumphant, relieved. Grounded. Unified. And I looked at it every morning to remind myself. Sometimes the real victories are quiet. Sometimes they come after years of silence. Sometimes they come when you finally say, "Enough." And that's how I learned. Power doesn't always come from a title. Sometimes it comes from refusing to be complicit. From choosing the truth when everyone else is too comfortable to face it. And from knowing, if they think you won't speak, they've already underestimated the wrong woman. And that's how I learned that silence protects power. But truth? Truth changes it. Have you ever been overlooked for someone who didn't earn it? Drop your story in the comments. Like this if you believe quiet people aren't weak, they're just watching. And subscribe for more stories of justice, exposure, and resilience.